left, right.
This episode, How to Think Like a Scientist, was inspired by me coming across an article where the science just didn't quite add up. Now, I'd like to think of myself as a bit of a critical thinker, not always a critical thinker, but I do like to question fact, figure out where it's established from, where it comes from, and I realize that a lot of people don't have full systems for processing information. And if you don't have a system of processing information, new information specifically, you don't really have a solid way, a sound way of thinking. And if it's something you never really thought about, well, now's the time to think about it. So this episode, How to Think Like a Scientist, we break down some ways to think, and we critique different ways of thinking. And I think you might like this episode. We'll see. Enjoy.
This is SipTalk. Grab a drink and enjoy.
Of course, let's go.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. This is SipTalk, episode 193. Unfortunately, our live title of this podcast is the last episode, but this is the new episode, and today we are talking about the scientific method and how to think like a scientist. We might be talking a little bit about
also
plankton.
how to spot when people do it badly.
Well, we might be talking about phytoplankton and some zooplankton, something along those lines. Maybe we'll set ourselves straight once we get there. Either way, I just popped on Instagram to make sure we're live, and I saw a nice video. Rosh walking his dogs in Central Park, which was nice. Before we went live, we just hit this whole interchange about who's on first and what's his name on second, and et cetera, et cetera. If you guys aren't familiar with this comedy sketch, well, shame on you. So
You should watch it. It's like 90 years old and it still holds up.
I wonder what year. Raj, can you just check that video real quick? Let us know what year that comedy sketch is from. But it's actually something I reference on a pretty regular basis. And now I'm realizing that not that many people may actually be familiar with it. So we'll see where that goes.
1945, Rosh says.
1945. Holy shit. All right. Well,
I think that goes to prove that there are some things that are funny no matter, like, that you can do comedy regardless of, like, I guess, contemporary ideas. That, like, Laurel and Hardy was like a 30s TV show that was also hilarious. And it was all physical comedy of them just getting into situations. And
it sounds almost more like vaudevillian. Like, this almost seems a bit vaudevillian.
Laurel and Hardy were like non-violent Three Stooges.
Interesting. So I got to ask you. Last time, well, let's see. Right, I said Abbott Costello performed the classic "Who's on First" baseball sketch, 1945, in the film "The Naughty 90s," first performed as part of their stage act. I'm not familiar with Laurel and Hardy, oddly. So look, I got to ask you, because last podcast we were talking about what we were drinking, and you mentioned you were on a diet. So rather than drinking alcohol, you were drinking soda, which
so
a bit counterintuitive for me.
Well, when you go calorie for calorie, the soda that I'm drinking weighs in at exactly the same amount of calories as I would have in a beer, but I've stopped drinking for the foreseeable future to see if I can drop some weight. And like, what the people aren't seeing on the podcast is the beers that I have off the podcast.
I know typically after the podcast, I don't know what you drink when we don't hang out after the podcast, but for those of you who don't listen, a lot of the evenings we end up sticking on the podcast for a little while afterwards, and we consume quite a bit. I know I do, at least. But at that point,
be everything. I do bourbon, brandy and wine, all sorts of stuff.
Well, speaking of the scientific method, calorically, beer and soda are somewhat similar. However, the issue with beer is it has alcohol in it, which causes you to drink more and eat more. So that's that. So look, let's. You want to follow my my kind of flow chart here,
I think we should.
and
I'd like to
and
start with how we came up with this topic, and maybe read the thing that you sent me last night that kind of pushed us in this direction.
all right. Well, yeah, I'll just lead with where I saw this. So I saw yesterday a post about how
Where was this
roughly
post?
on Instagram. It was an Instagram story about how 90+% of the plankton in the ocean is disappearing. So apparently there was a test. Somebody measured some water, and they expected a certain amount of plankton to be in the water, yet they found way less than they expected, like roughly what they had predicted 100 or so years from now. And I didn't read the article, but I did take a screenshot of it with an intention to read the entire commentary and then look up where it came from, because that's how my brain works. I said, wow, this is alarming. Let me figure out where this came from, do a little more research. In the meantime, I sent it to you so that we could digest it together. And you went ahead and actually did a little more research on the article that was being referenced in the post that I saw, and you sent an article in response to it. And what did that article say?
Let me pull it up. Basically, that the article that you were looking at um, was bad science reporting, where the people that wrote the article are drawing the wrong conclusions from too little data. And the short answer is we don't really know. And I guess I want to start off with whenever I see science articles that have alarmist headlines, I'm immediately suspicious because I recognize that there's plenty of things that are bad in this world, but when I see an article that comes out and it's worse than my expectations, I have to think, okay, how could things possibly be that bad? And most of the time they aren't. And it really annoys me when I see those because it has the same effect of like the boy who cried wolf, where if someone
Well,
who
because then
doesn't have
people, but that's what happens is people tune it out. Just I don't know if you remember, but during the 70s and 80s, they were talking about how the Earth was just gonna run out of oil over the next 7 or 8 years.
well, I think it's worse than that because you have
I can
some
give you other
people that'll
examples.
tune out,
Yeah.
but you'll also have some people that will look at an article and see that it makes a ridiculous claim, and then they're like, there's no way that can be true, and it turns out that no, it can't be true. And so they start to assume that any science article that they see is illegitimate. And it makes it so that when there is an article that actually makes a point about something being really bad and it's well researched and has a rigorous study and it comes to a really negative conclusion, then it's going to get lumped in with those bad studies. And people are going to say, well, I just can't believe anything that I read, and anything that scientists tell me is motivated by some other set of desires, and they can't be trusted. And so it makes it so that people don't trust science at all because of a very small amount of illegitimate studies that get undeserved attention.
Well, and I think that's why we need to be talking about what is science, the scientific method, and how to think like a scientist. Because the fact that somebody might not trust science means that they're not thinking scientifically. Because that's not how science works. Where do you want to go from here?
Well,
Should we start with what is science and then compare it to pseudoscience and then maybe talk a little about the scientific method?
yeah, if you want to talk,
I
if
think
you
that's
want
a
to
good
kind of set
premise.
up the difference between science and pseudoscience,
So
I
science
think that's
is
an important one.
all right. Science is a systematic science is a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations and predictions about the universe. The
You should say
earliest
hi to
root
Maria.
Hola, Maria. The earliest roots of the history of science can be traced back to ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia around 3000 to 12,000 BCE. So, a systematic enterprise that builds and organizes knowledge in the form of testable explanations. Wow. Maybe it's the alcohol. And predictions. So, testable explanations and predictions about the universe. And they don't mean the universe like the stars and other planets. They just mean everything. The use of the word universe there just means everything. So,
yeah, and I would say that in its most basic form, science is all about I have a question. Can I design a test that will try and answer that question? Okay, I'm going to design that test. I'm going to run the test and then see what I get back and see how that lines up with what I thought at the beginning.
but it's comparing the results based off of the question.
Yep.
So the scientific method has 5 basic steps. 1, make an observation. 2, ask a question, basically to prove that observation. Form a hypothesis, a testable explanation. Make a prediction based on that hypothesis, and then test the prediction. And then iterate. Use the results to make a new hypothesis or prediction.
I'd say designing the test is probably the hardest part.
Sure, but versus pseudoscience, which is defined by Google as a collection of beliefs or practices mistakenly regarded as being based on the scientific method. So pseudoscience is basically an idea that you're not testing and you're gathering evidence to support that idea without testing the evidence, without testing the idea.
You can do tests and still be in the realm of pseudoscience. If the tests are poorly designed.
Well, and that's where we get a bit more into kind of the scientific method. And I think the idea of science is that you're looking for answers, and then once you get those answers, you're looking to ask better questions to get better answers. So
let's take the post from yesterday, and let's use that as our case study as to why it's bad science.
Well, so let me tell you what I was thinking when I heard this. Oh, they did a they're saying the plankton in the ocean is a tenth of what they expected it to be for 2022. And my thought initially was, where did they test this? How much did they test? And like, what do the tests look like building up until now? So if they just took a 1950s test and they compared it to today, we don't have much supporting evidence leading up to that. Also, it may depend on location. Like maybe, in the hotter areas of the ocean over the summertime, the plankton is
deeper,
less populated in that area. Maybe deeper underwater, because maybe they just avoid hot water. And if they tested in that water over the summertime, the plankton could have located themselves somewhere else. But I don't know. I didn't. But my thought was, let me look into this study. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah. Well, so when I read it, I just want to read this whole thing so that people can see what we're talking about and have and they can have a basis for why this trips some wires for me.
All right.
So, a research team has spent 2 years collecting water samples from across the Atlantic, from Cape Verde to Grenada, and in a dire warning states the equatorial Atlantic Ocean is pretty much dead. The scientists from the Global Oceanic Environmental Survey warn that there are only a few years left before the consequences become catastrophically clear when fish, whales, and dolphins become extinct, with grave implications for the planet. In the report, which has not been peer-reviewed yet and must therefore be taken as preliminary data, the researchers state, an environmental catastrophe is unfolding. We believe humanity could adapt to global warming and extreme weather. However, it is our view that humanity will not survive the extinction of most marine plants and animals. Given that plankton is the life support system for the planet and humanity cannot survive without it, this result is disturbing.
So let's talk. Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
so
okay, go ahead. No, that's
I was just
fine.
going to say, let's talk about plankton, because if you never took a 6th or 7th grade science class, you may not be familiar with plankton. What plankton is effectively the the micronutrients that are either plant-based or animal-based, very small organisms that feed the tiniest. It's basically the start of the food chain. Right? It's the
Well,
bottom of
whales
the
eat a
food chain.
shitload of plankton too.
Whales, yeah, fair enough, but it is still the smallest of the small animals eat plankton, and it is the base of the food
Yeah.
chain.
No, is plankton a plant or an animal?
There's two different types of plankton. There's phytoplankton and zooplankton. Am I
Okay, so cyto would be
accurate?
plant and zuo would be animal.
Yeah, yeah. Is that? Am I missing something on that?
No. Next question I have: does plankton produce oxygen?
Ooh, I don't know about that one, but I would think. So let's see. You
Maybe
have
the
these.
plant form does. Maybe
Yeah,
cytoplankton does.
there's a decent chance that the plant. Yeah, um, but I would think that they must have some type of byproduct. So do you know the
Well,
answer to this, or you're
no,
bullshit
no,
asking?
I'm legitimately asking that one.
Oh yeah.
My
I don't
guess
know
would be that cytoplankton does produce oxygen. So if
because it's
cytoplankton
plant
dies
based.
off, think about, even though like plankton are small, like you could imagine like them kind of being the grass of the ocean, and think about the ocean's about 70% of the planet. So if you have like a whole bunch of grass die off, think about how much less oxygen is being produced because the surface area of the ocean is just immense.
Yeah, yeah. It is.
Rosh is, all right, so Rosh is doing some good work here. He's saying 80% of plankton are plants, and are
Which is
estimated for producing
phytoplankton.
an estimated 80% of the world's oxygen. So that answers my question and really highlights why they're important, because not only are they food, they also produce oxygen for us.
So let me just. I just want to get into a little bit more about what is science, and this is. It goes back to the root of questioning things, right? Like James and I just had this conversation based off what we hypothesized plankton to be. Yet, had we been proven wrong, we would have allowed that 4-minute conversation to have no weight. I think of a good scientist akin to a 3 or 4 year old in a car seat, and you tell them, they say, hey, we're going to daycare, and they say, why? And you say, because I have to go to my job. And they say, why? And you say, well, because I have to pay for things like this car and like the house. And they say, why? And you say, well, because we need a house to live in, and then we need
Yeah, and
food.
5 minutes later, you're going through a full existential crisis.
And then they say, why? Exactly. But that's the idea of science. Now, at a certain level, a lot of those whys have answers already, but the goal is asking why and understanding why. When you get to a point where you don't understand it, that's when you start testing. But
Yeah, the
but
problem is that you're on any chain of the question why, you will eventually run into something that you can't answer.
But the method of thought, the scientific method, seeks to explain the physical world. But it may not always explain it. But it looks to understand existence, causation, relation, and interaction. So it's doing. You may not have the ability to explain everything, but that's what we're looking to understand.
Well,
So
and I think another aspect is all scientists are going to have an idea as to how they think something works, and like a good
that's your
scientist,
hypothesis.
yeah, but like a good scientist will be happy to be proven wrong.
That's the thing that I think a lot of people don't understand is that's where the mind is of a good scientist is the scientific method is looking to disprove an idea. The whole idea is you prove something right by attempting to disprove it. That's how you prove something right. I want to, I was just, this is a comment that I had in here. You see the Y2K comment. Do you remember Y2K 1999 when they're like the
Yeah, I
world?
remember we wanted to pull a prank that night.
I don't remember if we did. But the idea was
We didn't actually go through with it. But
so
do you
hold on.
remember what we were going to do?
Let me set the premise because I think I. But The premise was that as the clocks midnight on December 1999, that all the computers were going to basically implode because they couldn't process
The way that dates
the
were
year
stored would have been
2000.
in 2 digits of like
Yeah.
7/22/77, and so when it would change from 12/31/99 to 1/1/2000, it would be 1100, and the computers wouldn't be able to handle that.
And realistically, that was something that could have been easily tested by just kind of setting your computer to December 31st, 11:59 p.m. and just kind of letting that play out. But everybody had these crazy theories about how the electric company was going to shut down and
Or nuclear missiles were going to spontaneously launch.
Yeah, but but again, like, what was the mechanism? That was making that happen. What was our plan on New Year? Were we going to turn off the power breaker or something?
Yeah, we were going to sneak downstairs and cut the main breaker to the house right at midnight.
Are you sure we didn't do this? I feel like this would have been something that we did.
No, the problem that we couldn't figure out how to overcome was
Getting out
how
of the
we were
room?
going to explain disappearing at midnight.
That would,
Like,
I mean,
where'd James and
just for the
Justin
record,
go? Like people are counting down 10, 9, 8, and then we just dart out of the room, and then all of a sudden the power goes out. We couldn't figure out a way to make it like disconnect the causal relationship between us leaving the room and the power going out.
this comes from a couple of guys that put like a quarter stick of dynamite in a bonfire at summer camp. And
Yeah, we got away with that one.
And when it blew up, first off, we put it. Here was our plan. We put the thing inside. We found like a crack in a piece of wood, and we put it inside of a piece of wood, and then let that piece of wood get thrown on the fire. And then, of course, it fucking exploded. And then one of the camp and like kids leapt to the ground, like ducked and covered. I mean, we were what, 12 or something?
Yeah, we had to have been
No, maybe 14. I think this must have been
somewhere in that
ride.
range.
In the
Like,
14 and a half to 15 range. And the fucking thing went off. Kids went ducked and people hit the ground, not like one, but
yeah, it was a strong firecracker that we jammed into a stick so that you couldn't see it, but the fuse was sticking out.
So, but the thing went off, and one of the camp counselors was like, "It's all right, guys. What happens is water gets stuck inside the walls of the stick, and it expands rapidly when heated." This is fucking dynamite.
And it's just like
people's
this
ears
explosion
are
was like 100 times louder than anything you ever heard pop in a fire before. It just
oh yeah. If people download, they watch like YouTube TV with a fireplace on their
it wasn't Rush, it wasn't dynamite, it was just a powerful firecracker.
No,
but
it was like an M80 or something. I think it was along those lines, right?
But I don't even think it was that big, because the thing is, like, it's just even a small firecracker is going to be that much louder than everything else. And I don't know how, like, we didn't give ourselves away, because you and I were laughing so hard we were crying at the time.
Yeah, no, we were. All right, so let me ask you a question. You familiar with the Socratic method, Socrates line of questioning?
Yeah, philosophy major. How could I not be?
Basically, where you ask questions. So when you're faced with somebody who's got some crazy pseudoscience, maybe a flat earther, the way to approach that would be, and we're going to get in a second into why you might think like a scientist. But when somebody tells you, hey, the earth is flat, you're like, no, obviously the earth is round. And then the Socratic method might be to start asking questions to have them then explain themselves. So somebody tells you the earth is flat, you might say, oh, well, then how would you explain the moon? The moon seems round. It seems to go around the earth. And, would you think the earth is, how does that work? And then you might say, well,
and what about all these other planets that we've seen that are also similarly round?
We see the sun, and it kind of warms part of the earth, and then we spin away from the sun, and then you might say, well, what about the map? We have this kind of idea of the globe, and it seems to wrap. And how would you explain that? And then daylight versus night, and then you might ask them, well, how do you think satellites work? Satellites are based on kind of a sphere having gravity. So So I explain satellites, the satellites being trapped in the Earth's gravitational pull uh, at this equilibrium with escape velocity. How would you explain satellites? You think they just
You know
hung
what
there?
the simplest way to test this is to see that the Earth is curved? Is all you need is like a relatively flat horizon. So like the beach is perfect for this.
Hmm.
Um, and a way to quickly change your elevation. So, like, what you want to do is you want to wait for it to be sunset. And you watch the sun go, like, stand on the beach or at ground level and watch the sun go down. And then find a way to get to a higher point. So, like, if you're at the beach, go to your hotel and just ride the elevator up to like the fifth floor. And like the sun that was set when you were at ground level, you'll be able to see the sun again now that you're 50 feet up in the air. I'm pretty sure you can do this with just like a 10-foot ladder, but
No,
obviously
yeah,
effectively
no, you, no,
magnified.
you, no, you totally can. You totally can. But you can run up. You can run up 3 flights of stairs, and as the sun disappears, we see the sun. It's totally testable.
Yeah.
So look, can we progress? Just because I want to ask these questions or make
Well,
these statements.
so
Why
Jessica
think
says
scientists?
everything is magical to me. Well, you know what? When you think about modern technology, just as an aside, think about all the crazy things that we have that can be that and the things that they do, and then think about someone from like the 1200s looking at that and tell me that their conclusion wouldn't be that that's magic.
Well, I have the video lined up that I sent you. I want to play it in a little bit once we get to religion. Is that
Okay,
cool?
yeah, the Neil deGrasse Tyson clip.
Yeah, but let me ask
Yeah,
this:
one of the rare cases
Why?
where he's not being dismissive.
No, we had a conversation about him with Scott, and we all agreed on this guy. It's kind of sad, but we like Neil deGrasse Tyson. So, um, we lost our stream here on the phone overheated,
Hang on just a sec. I gotta take a quick phone call.
go for it. So I'm going to talk about why you would want to think like a scientist. We talked about how to think like, or we talked about what scientific thinking was a little while ago. I'm going to talk about why you might want to think about thinking like a scientist. And one is you have an actual system to process new information. So information is given to you. What do you do with that information? So my question to you would be: do you have a system for actually processing? Do you have a system for actually thinking and comprehending new information? Why would you want to think like a scientist? So that you have a way to think about things, so that you don't think like an idiot, or you don't look like an idiot. Worse off.
Well,
Um,
thinking like a scientist is going to prevent you from just blindly accepting what people tell you, which will protect you from being taken advantage of because you'll be able to think for yourself and instead of letting other people think for you.
well, if you don't have a good system of processing information, you could have a false foundation of reality. And that's what happened when a lot of young people get indoctrinated into religion. They're
Or
easily,
cults,
or not even young people.
or
Some people,
voting for Trump.
uh, um, but being easily misled is a symptom of not having scientific thinking roots. A lot of people get their news from the headlines, rarely seek the source and understand where that came from, which I think is really important. So, you want to talk a little bit about how to think like a scientist?
Well, I think the first thing is to question what you are seeing, but and look at the quality of the sources. So, for example, when you sent me that post last night, I looked at it and I saw that there was only one scientist named in it. So I did a quick Google search of him, and the guy. So it is a real scientist. It is a real person, and he is a marine biologist. But he's a marine biologist whose specialty is in water filtration. So I look at it and I say, yes, you're a scientist, but your specialty is not in like ocean ecology. it's in water filtration. So maybe you're not the best source for interpreting these results.
Well,
Like
let's
if we were talking about like how to filter water better, or like purity of the ocean's water or something, maybe I'd listen to them a little bit more. But if you're talking about ecology, well, there's probably people that are more specialized than you are.
let's talk about how they generally measure plankton. What you do is you look at a certain amount of liquid, and then you count the plankton that you can see. However, there are visible plankton, and there are plankton that are microscopic, meaning not visible to the naked eye. You need some level of optical zoom on that. So we don't know how this guy was also measuring the plankton. He didn't say he was looking at it under a microscope.
Yeah, well, so in the article that I sent you, where they talk about this study and how good it is compared to other studies, is they say that in the article that you referenced, they took 500 samples, which sounds like a lot, but another scientist said in the continuous plankton recorder survey, they've got 265,000 samples.
But
So
I'm curious how that stacks up to this, and also
500 versus 265,000.
exactly. Do you remember being kids when we used to look at pond water and stream water in a bucket and then under a microscope? You remember doing that?
Yep.
I think we have a little bit of a delay, so I'm sorry for you guys. You're experiencing our delay. I want to talk
Well,
about the scientific method real quick. James, you wanna deliver this?
I
The
wanted to
next
talk
paragraph.
more about, like, I think we've talked about that a good bit. I want to talk about like some of the red flags of bad science.
Well, can we hit the scientific method, and then we'll cover the religious aspect, and then I'll play this video, and then we can pull up that PDF. I can share it on the screen. Does that
The
sound good?
rough guide to spotting bad science.
Yeah, yeah. So you want to hit this paragraph, how to think like a scientist, the scientific method. I'll uh, I'll hit about religion, play the video, and then we can pull up that shared PDF.
Hang on, because a lot of this we've already said. I
Yeah,
think
well, you can mention it again.
and it's systematically testing your assumptions, and it's not as simple as as soon as you find a result that you like, you just say I'm done. It's okay, that was one positive result. Let's keep on repeating this test, and let's build consistency of results, so that way this one positive result wasn't a fluke. And it's the same thing for a negative result. It's you want to run the tests over and over and over again and be able to establish a pattern one way or another, and only then can you really start to form some kind of a conclusion. And then once you have a conclusion, then you can change some of the parameters of the test a little bit to see how things vary. Once you've established a baseline, try changing some variables and see what effect those have.
But also, the goal is to disprove the conclusion. So you're attempting to disprove your conclusion, and when you cannot disprove it from every angle, or as many conceivable angles as there are, then your conclusion holds some water.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
never it's rare that you're going to be able to say this is fact.
well,
It's
but but even at the utmost scientific pinnacle, you hold fact as temporary fact. This is what we believe now, until it can then be disproven.
it's really hard for me to think of anything in science that is held as a straight up fact.
I think about anything in the world, yeah. Science,
Because
science
because
aside, yeah,
I'm
science is the
thinking
world.
in terms of science, there's like I'm thinking conservation of energy is one. That might be about it.
Let me talk about religion real quick, because you're delving in, you're leaning on the religious kind of arm of this. There's certain things that can't be explained. So let's talk real quick about religion. there are some scientists who are religious. According to Neil deGrasse Tyson, roughly 40%. However, the majority of religious people embrace a lot of the majority of science.
True.
Now, you typically don't see scientists outside of churches. However, you see religious people outside of science labs, outside of schools and centers that create curriculums, and outside of labs. You see a lot more religious people protesting science than you see scientists protesting religion. Now, I want to share a video from Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about religion. Providing it loads, it looks like we got
Yeah,
a
I
little
do
bit
think
of a.
he actually makes some good points in this video.
Yeah, this video actually is whether it was this video or kind of the sentiment from Neil deGrasse Tyson that was one of the things that kind of got me on board with him as a dude. So let me just share this. You know, getting on board with somebody as a dude is important. So let me know when you can see my screen here.
Yeah, you're good.
All right, cool.
Me? So I'm the more I look at the universe, just the less convinced I am that there is something benevolent going on. So if your concept of a creator is someone who's all powerful, all good, that's not an uncommon pairing of powers that you might describe to a creator. All powerful and all good. And I look at disasters that afflict Earth and life on Earth, volcanoes, hurricanes.
I don't think this is the one I was looking at.
Disease.
Click the other one. You've got another tab open.
Let's just hear this. Let's hear him out here.
You look at this list of ways that life is made miserable on Earth by natural causes. And I just ask, how do you deal with that?
All right, let me hit the next one because
Yeah, I'll address what he's talking about there because, but this is the video you were looking for.
Yeah, this is the one I was looking for. Sorry, I had a couple of them up, but we'll let this load here. And this is about religion and people leaning on religion for kind of the unknown.
I think you must realize that some people are going to go to your show criteria, and they're going to say, "Aha, those scientists have discovered God, because God matter."
No, we got a little pause.
Universe together.
Is that a question?
It's a statement. You know they're going to say.
So the history of discovery, particularly cosmic discovery, but discovery in general, scientific discovery, is one where at any given moment there's a frontier. And there tends to be an urge, especially religious people, to assert that across that boundary into the unknown lies the handiwork of God. This show lies. This, over time, has been described by philosophers as the God of the gaps. If that's where you're going to put your God in this world, then God is an ever-receding pocket of scientific ignorance. If that's how you're going to invoke God, if God is the mystery of the universe, these mysteries, we're tackling mysteries one by one. If you're going to stay religious at the end of the conversation, God has to be more to you than just where science has yet to try.
So I actually wrote a paper in college on a really similar topic, which was I started with the idea, like, if you go back 2,000 years, like, the Earth was the center of the universe, and that was it. Like, the sun, we had no idea what it was. We just knew that it was this warm ball in the sky, and all the stars were just, like, they were just there. But we didn't know what they were, how they came to be. And as scientific progress moved on, we moved from the Earth is the center of the universe to the Earth revolves around the sun, to there's many other planets that are not exactly like the Earth, but there are many other planets that are in our solar system, and then our solar system is just one solar system of many millions or billions or trillions in our galaxy, and then our galaxy is just one of billions of galaxies in the universe. And so this progression of us becoming smaller and less central to the universe had the effect of pushing a lot of people away from religion, because religion said we are the center of the universe, and over time people began to accept the overwhelming proof that we weren't. And it's kind of like, if you have someone that lies to you and you find out about that lie, then you are going to question what they say to you in the future pretty much forever, because you're like, this is a known liar. I now am going to have to question everything they say to me because it might not be the truth. And so that's what happened with religion, and that's why if you go back 2,000 years, what percentage of people were religious? 99.9%, right?
Yeah.
And
And now.
and now it's probably somewhere between like 50 and 70%, depending on what. Well, actually, it highly varies based on country. But in the United
Yeah,
States, probably
exactly.
somewhere between 50 and 70%. And the reason for that
But
is,
we're defining religiousness also.
yeah, obviously
Can I just
there's a
hang
lot
on?
of
Hold
play
up.
here.
Speaking of religion, I just want to show you this beer. See how nice and this is just the outside. It's not frozen on the inside, but it's nice and look at that. It's got a nice.
Must be God.
I must be God. God must be blessing my beer with a nice frozen,
Yeah, but that
frozen
my
chug
basic
here.
theory was, the more we discover, the less we need religion. And there are some fundamental questions that I don't think are answerable. So if you ask what's the meaning of life, or why are we here, any of those kinds of questions, so you can't answer that with science, and religion attempts to answer it. And so people ask me, people ask me all the time if I'm religious, and I say no, and they say, "Oh, so therefore you're an atheist." I say, "No." Because that's also an assertion. I say there's no point in there's no point in trying to answer a question that cannot be answered. Like, if you can't, if you, I guess I try to explain people, I'm empiricist, which is, if you can give me some definitive proof one way or the other, then it's a question worth asking. But when you're asking something like, what's the meaning of life? I say, there's no point even asking that question, because you can't answer it. There's no way that you can prove an answer correct when it comes to what's the meaning of life.
Yeah, I agree with you. So look, so I'm
And
gonna
so
hit this.
that's why I'm not religious, is because I look at religion as trying to answer all of these questions that cannot be answered. And I say, if a question can't be answered, it really doesn't have any value.
Well, I think what Raj just said makes a lot of sense. The meaning of life is what you make it to be.
That's existentialism.
Well, exactly. Uh, so let's talk about our 15 reasons, our 15 ways of spotting bad science, pointed out in 12 bullet points.
Yeah.
All right.
So I think that the post from yesterday that you sent me hits a lot of
Hits number
these.
one. Well, actually, yeah, no, yeah, you're right. Um, I think one and maybe two right off the bat.
One, I'm going to
I'll
go
let
with
you.
one.
Read
There.
one. Read one.
So
For anybody
one,
who's listening, doesn't know what it is.
sensationalized headlines. So I don't know what the headline of your post was. It just says breaking news. But I would say, like, the first sentence, the first paragraph where it says the equatorial Atlantic Ocean is pretty much dead, that's a sensationalized headline. If we were to make that the headline, the equatorial Atlantic Ocean is pretty much dead. That's sensationalized. Because
Yeah,
you're just
and
thinking of
it's
a large
scary. I mean,
swath of the
it's
ocean that's just
sensationalized.
dead.
It's scary. Yeah. What
Um,
does dead mean?
well, yeah, but when you say large area and dead, that's sensationalized.
Yeah, what are people aren't going to read the entire article and then check the facts. They might read a few paragraphs of the article, and that's them fact checking.
Yeah.
So which then brings us to number 2.
Misinterpreted results. So you can have results, but you can draw the wrong conclusion from them. And so I would say that the article is less guilty of the misinterpreted results, because if you look and you say the plankton is 90% gone, than to say that something is pretty much dead if only 10% is left. I don't think that's a misinterpretation. Like I think
No, yeah, I agree with you.
I
Yeah, I
think
mean, I think
it's
they
the
interpreted the
results are
results.
wrong, but the
Yeah.
interpretation of the results might not actually be wrong in this one.
So let's go to the next number 3, conflicts of interest, and this stems from companies hiring other companies to do tests for them and to do surveys for them.
You see this
And
most often in environmental studies and health studies.
yeah, so if I'm a giant conglomerate manufacturing company and I'm dumping chemicals into the Hudson River, and I hire a company to see the health of the Hudson River, and they're like, "Oh no, checks out, it's good."
Right, because I'm the one paying them. So like if I say no, this is a complete disaster, then my client might say, "We're not going to pay you," or "We're not going to have you continuing to do this study. We don't like your results, so we're going to hire somebody else and pay them millions of dollars instead of you." It's
It's
also the
just
same thing in health,
the
where like,
conflict, but the conflict of being paid by somebody whose furthered interests are in line with a certain result, like there's a major issue with that.
well, it's like the cigarette companies 50 or 60 years ago had all these studies showing that smoking didn't affect health. They had tons of studies. They could say, "See, it's fine." In fact, 4 out of 5 doctors do it.
Yeah, that's more than recommend a certain type of toothpaste. All right, so what else you got? You got
So,
conflict of
correlation and
interest.
causation. This is a good one. Because just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that they cause each other. Um, so, you can look at, for example, um, more people drown when ice cream sales go up.
So ice cream causes death.
Yeah, ice cream causes people to drown. So why do you think they obviously they're not correlated? It's like if you see ice cream sales spike, you'd be like, "Oh boy, we better hire more lifeguards."
Well, obviously there's a correlation, but there's no causation.
Right. And the idea is they're correlated because more people are probably more likely to buy ice cream when it's really hot out, and people are also more likely to swim when it's really hot out. And the more
Yeah, but
people you have
swimming,
swimming, some people
the
are
more
going to
people you
drown.
have the potential to drown, exactly. But the ice cream isn't causing the drowning. The swimming
And the
is
drowning
causing
isn't
the drowning.
causing people to buy
And
ice cream.
and not so much the swimming is causing the drowning, the lack of the ability, the lack of the knowledge of knowing how to swim.
It's just if you have a certain risk percentage of people, of 0.5% of all people will drown when they go swimming. Well, if you have millions more people swimming, you're going to have a lot more drownings. The drowning rate is the same, you just have more people doing it.
Well, that's my shark bite. That's my shark bite analogy. Look, oh, it's perfectly safe to swim in the ocean. 1 out of 800 million people get bit by a shark. I'm like, yeah, but 800 million people don't go swimming in the ocean. So,
Well,
I mean, still, I'll get it. You're not very likely to be bitten by sharks, but actually, a whole bunch of people have been bitten by sharks off of New York City, off of Long Island this summer. So that's a little wild. Let's talk about unsupported conclusions. You want to read that one?
hold on a second.
So it's basically a conclusion by a study that isn't supported by any data.
No, what's funny is that your PDF is different than the one that I'm looking at.
Well, look at mine then.
Well, unsupported conclusions, I guess we can stick with the ice cream and drowning thing, is like whenever people are when ice cream sales reach a certain point, we need to close public pools.
I feel like that has a lot to do with coronavirus. Correlatory to coronavirus.
But kind of going along the lines of that on my PDF is speculative language, which is close to unsupported conclusions. And I think like it might be like anytime they say it might be or it could or something like that, that's saying, well, I mean, sure, it could be, but what is the could? What percentage chance does that represent? Is could 80% or 8% or 0.8%? Because like Justin,
Yeah.
you could win the lottery tomorrow.
I could.
You could win the
Didn't
jackpot.
play,
You could win
but
Powerball.
I could, yeah, I
Um,
didn't play.
like a meteor could strike the Earth tomorrow.
Mm.
And the sun could
All
rise
right.
tomorrow. All those things are
Let-
could, but the vast range of probabilities.
Let's talk about sample size real quick.
Well, if you've got too small of a sample, then you might not be capturing like a real picture of whatever population you're looking at, and you could be picking. You could just by random chance be picking kind of outliers, and getting a really incorrect picture as to what you're trying to measure, and you so like another like an example of this would be if you were to go to a restaurant in lower Manhattan that like Wall Street bankers go
Yeah,
to.
high end.
Yeah. And you were to ask them how much money do you make every single year, and you ask 20 people in the restaurant, and you come away saying, "Wow, the average person in this country
The
makes $1
average
million
person,
a year." Be like, "Well, your sample size was too small, and it was also unrepresentative," which gets us to number 7.
That's the yeah. Go ahead. Go
But
ahead.
like, all right, sample size would be too small. You only ask the people that are eating there. If you ask the busboy how much does he make, well, now you're not going to be at $1 million a year anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. All right. Hit 8.
No control group used. So this is like you always need to have some benchmark against what you're measuring. So what happens if we do nothing is an extremely important question in pretty much all of science.
I don't think we spent that much time thinking and talking about it during coronavirus because the general rhetoric around coronavirus it was and is we have to do something, but at
Well,
this
and
point
that's
everybody's gotten or will get coronavirus.
well, actually,
So,
that's a really good point. Is that when you look at coronavirus, I was actually talking with my uncle about this 2 weeks ago, of how we're never going to know whether what we did in relation to virus was correct, because it was impossible to have a control group. Well, it was possible to have a control group, but that would have basically meant we do nothing, and like
well,
for better or for
in
worse, the
certain case,
government said
you got
we need to
Florida,
do something about this.
but you got Florida and Texas to compare that to. So.
But even still, the
And
like
Sweden.
Sweden did a little bit, but you didn't have a true control group. And a true control group means nothing, no restrictions, no travel restrictions, no vaccines, no nothing, and see what the death rate is there. And even the most lax of countries had something in place.
But that the issue is you have a difficult group to control against. You have a difficult group to compare against. It's
Like you
difficult to
had
compare-
limited control groups because you could look at states that locked down hard, and you could look at states like Florida and Texas that opened up early. But the problem is then you also have the problem of unrepresentative samples, because New York City is different than Tallahassee.
Oh, because of the infrastructure. But I think control group and placebo are synonymous.
Not necessarily. Because
Well-
the difference is if you have a control group, it's you're not giving them any medicine. Placebo is you're giving them something they think is medicine, but it isn't. It's just a sugar pill or something.
So number 9.
So no blind testing. So the whole idea is you always want to do it double blind, where the recipients don't know what they're getting, and the scientists don't know what they're giving. So I think about like 12 years ago when we did our blind taste test of the whiskeys, and like
This is what Jim Beam versus Jack Daniels or something.
Evan Williams versus Jack Daniels. And
Yeah.
it was impossible for us to do it double blind, but we did it blind where I left the room, you poured 2 shots, and then I had to try them both and see which one I liked, and then you did the same thing. But you still knew what you were pouring. However, like we did the closest we could come to making a double blind is that when I was taking the samples, when I was sipping the shot glass or whatever, you weren't allowed to say anything. You weren't allowed to react to make it seem like you had a preference as to one or the other. You just said, here's shot glass A, here's shot glass B. Take a sample, see what you like better. But
Yeah.
there's possibilities where the scientists could treat the recipients differently, not even intentionally, just because if they know that they're giving one person a vaccine that actually has something and another that just has saline solution.
Yeah.
And so the idea is the scientists shouldn't know what's in the syringe before they give it to the recipients.
That's Schrodinger's cat, the observationist effect.
Yeah, a common
Not really, no.
misconception
It's not.
about Schrodinger's cat experiment is that he actually came up with that idea to show that quantum mechanics is completely nonsensical. Not to show how quantum mechanics works, but to show that quantum mechanics makes no sense, man. Because he's like, here's the conclusion. If we take quantum mechanics to the macro level, we're left with a result that we just cannot reconcile, which is the cat is both alive and dead.
Well, I mean, you're making decisions based on that fact is really the derivation of the whole experiment.
Well, yeah. Well,
And
in the world of quantum mechanics, and when you're designing quantum mechanical systems, you have to operate on the assumption that, like, a qubit is both up and down, and there's a probability of both, but you have to assume that it's acting as both up and down until you do something to it. And it's really hard for us to be able to just wrap our heads around that. I struggle with it.
Let's hit the next one: selective reporting of data.
Yeah, so that's cherry picking
like
results.
Cherry picking, exactly.
Right, so that's
It's
like
just, you get certain results. You're not displaying all of them. You're choosing certain results. It's like when we give actually a very bad example is a CMA analysis. When somebody says, how much is my house worth? And then we look at everything on the market that's sold for the last 90 or 180 days. And then we actually have to kind of cherry pick those results in between, find out which ones are closest to that listing. But that's not a good example of
I think it
science.
actually is
That's
a good example
science.
because you also get to
example of
conflicts
good
of interest too. But you can always look at it and say, well, that house is way below value, so I don't want to include this in the CMA report, and you're going to find reasons to throw it out. But if that house had been higher than what you wanted it to be, then you'd be like, well, let's find a way of keeping that one in the report.
So you and I have a friend that purchased a house at, let's say, 100% market value. The current value of that home is about 94% of market value. Yet the Zillow estimate shows about 185% of market value.
Well, I'm going to guess that the reason why it's half of what Zillow says it's worth is because it hasn't been maintained.
There's a maintenance issue, but there's also the value that's pulling it up is not data that's kind of congruent with this listing. It's not data that's similar to the listing. It's just kind of average price per square foot. But when this place is 70 or 80 years old, and the average price per square foot that's selling locally is on homes that are less than 10 years old, those homes are driving the property values much further up. So somebody might go to my friend and say, hey, your house is, or Zillow might go to my friend and say, hey, your house is worth this much, but that's not reality. Let's hit number 11 here.
Unreplicable results. So this is what we were talking about before of run the experiment over and over again to build your data. And if you run the experiment once, you're like, all right, cool, that's it. And then somebody else tries to do your experiment and they can't reproduce it, you got a problem.
All right, next one, quick, because we got 30 seconds. And we can go on after we're
Journals
off
and
air.
citations. So that's going to be like how many people have referenced your study and how much does your study reference previously established work. It's all about legitimacy of if you've got a candidate that comes in that has no references and you've got a candidate that comes in with 5 references and you call them up and they say, yeah, this guy's solid, who are you going to pick if their resumes are equal?
All right, we're out of time. We're going to stay on just a couple minutes, a little bit longer, but the goal is that scientific thinking is the goal is to disprove. And on that note, adios to those of you guys who are live. We'll catch you guys next time.
I'm going to bail on the Zoom.
All right, we're going to close out of TikTok and the other platforms here. TikTok got really fucked. My phone overheated a whole bunch of times.
Huh.
We got like 286 new followers on TikTok, so that was kind of cool.
Nice.
We got 50 likes on TikTok for our live presentation. So that was also kind of cool. But I just I want to kind of just circle back real quick on the idea of science and scientific thinking, because I think I have a lot of issues right now with how people are thinking, how people are making decisions, how people are jumping to conclusions. And the article yesterday, I didn't send it to you because I had made a conclusion on it. I sent it to you because I thought it was interesting, but also I sent it to you about 70 seconds before I went to sleep.
Yeah. I'm not saying that you were like buying into the article, but when I read it, I was like, this is actually a really good example of like bad science.
When I read it, I said, "Oh shit!" But
because it's written
my
to
brain
make you do that.
But my brain simultaneously said, "I need to know what's going on." And then this morning, I sent it to you last night, and then this morning I did a little research. My 7-minute train ride, because I spend an hour driving and then 7 minutes on the train. But during those 7 minutes, I get to do a little bit of Googling, so that's cool. Or I have a little bit of time where I'm not doing 95 miles an hour, and I have a little reception, so I can answer emails or look things up. So, but that was a super alarmist title, and it was really scary. So,
yeah, and it's like I'm all for us doing things to try and fix the environmental problems we've caused, but I don't want articles to be out there that make people think the problem is worse than it is, and it delegitimizes like well done studies where people just throw out all science, because that's the conclusion.
But it's a bit of a double-edged sword there, though, because it is a crazy, terrible, fucked up problem. But the study, but we don't have conclusive evidence and data to show that. We have some, but we don't have an overwhelming amount of data.
Well,
so you go back to the boy who cries wolf, which is what?
Like when coronavirus first came out, and the articles were about how terrible it would be to get the disease, and how like if you get it you're just gonna die, and all these like doom and gloom things about how it's going to wipe out like 10% of the world's population, all this other stuff. And while it was bad and it was something that needed to be addressed, at the same time there was alarmist stuff going on out there that made people like think about the people that were like paranoid to be within 10 feet of somebody else, even if they were wearing a mask, even if they were outside, because they were that scared of getting it. And how that's an effect of alarmist and exaggerated news articles about the topic, where are some precautions wise? Yes. Is there a certain point where you're being ridiculous? Also, yes. And what pushes people to like weird behavior? generally it's because they're misinformed.
Yeah, and I saw a lot of that shit happening. So on that note, let's wrap up. You cool with that? Anything else you want to add before we wrap?
No. Tell you that I bought that bike.
Oh no shit! The fucking expensive ass bike.
Yeah, I probably won't even be here for like another 6 weeks, which sucks.
Jesus Christ! All right, that's a conversation for off the air. But on that note, we James just bought a badass bicycle. He's got a badass motorcycle. But look, guys, we thank you for joining us, and we are gonna sign out. So this is Justin DiGiulio saying for James the Boswell. Adios.
All right, if you made it this far, I'm going to assume that you kind of dug this episode. But if you did, consider subscribing, liking, commenting. And if you already subscribed and you're like, oh, I subscribe, I'm good, you don't comment. I know that. So shoot me, throw a comment out there, tag me somewhere. Let me know you listened to this episode, How to Think Like a Scientist. And I'll see you guys next time. Adios.
I like PBR. I just got priced out of it.